So just to give us the context there, and just to second Marie and the previous speaker's comments, we know some things. We know that harm, especially in childhood, can have a lifelong negative effect. We know that this is more likely if that harm's severe, so sexual abuse, violence, domestic violence. And we know that harm is more likely to have lifelong effects if it's prolonged and throughout childhood, especially if it begins early. But the real important aspect of that is that we know that lifelong harm is more likely if it happens in the absence of supportive, nurturing, buffering caregivers. And particularly if those caregivers are the ones that are perpetrating that harm. That's the perfect storm, if you like. So ACEs has given us the common language for that. There's lots of other literature that has established that. And I think, if you ask yourselves, that's kind of a truth that we know anyway, doesn't it? I think if we got somebody off the street and asked them, they would ultimately know that's true. So what are the implications of these findings then? Well, there's two from my point of view. The first one is that we need to prevent. So that's a kind of no-brainer, right? We need to prevent harm to children. But there's another implication, which is we need to respond to those who have already experienced that harm and adversity and trauma. And I don't know about you, sometimes it feels like there's an either-or debate happening here. Do we early intervention? Yeah. And the answer is clearly we need to do both, right? My expertise is the response, so I'll skip straight to that. So the really difficult question becomes, how should we respond? How do we create services or society that responds in the right way, an effective way, for children who have experienced harm and adversity? And for me, the concepts and the thinking and the evidence about trauma-informed practice is a big part of the answer to that question. And again, we're in a 10-minute version here, right? But the big thing that I think that adds is that it says it doesn't require just a trauma service. We don't just have a new line in the CAM service or a new sort of outpatient clinic. It means that all services that have contact with service users can be part of this helpful response, which I think is quite a new and exciting perspective. So then I had a dilemma because I was thinking, right, do I go into the 4 principles of trauma-informed practice? Do we go into definitions? Or what do you do in 10 minutes? And I thought, right, if I've got 1 minute to get across what trauma-informed practice is, I'll go with this. And I'm going with this because I think empathy makes the world go around, right? But for me, it's asking ourselves and our services, if we had experienced these events, this harm, as adults or as children, as now or in our past, what would we want from services? What would we want from our GP, from the police, from our hospital appointment, from the school? Everybody that provides some kind of service to us, what would we want from them if we had those experiences? And we, in numerous different ways, have asked ourselves that question in Kibble. And over time, I think I have realised, and I think a few other folk have as well, is that when that answer to that question is a really different service. There's lots of things that you can do to change and improve what we do to be part of that helpful response. So I'm going to give you a quick example here. So we have looked at Kibble and thought, right, how can we make this part of an effective response for our young people? Now we obviously have a particularly niche group of young people who have had very, very difficult experiences, but I think this goes for all services. And we've broken it down into 3 main areas. One is the workforce, one is the therapies we provide, and one is everything else shoved together. And these circles are meant to be a clever way of showing you like what proportion of those work, the size of everything. And I thought, right, what example do I go into to illustrate the depth and the pervasiveness of trauma-informed thinking and how it can affect things? And I thought, let's use staff. Because think about the response, you don't automatically think, right, we need to look at the people that are working in these services as the main thing that you might change if you become trauma-informed. Oops. So we're going down a level now, right? I told you I was a geek, we're going to get details here. So there's three main projects we're looking at. One is training support, and everybody gets that, right? We need to be trauma-informed, we need to do some training. Let's get some training, right? The next one is recruitment. So how do we actually recruit the right people in order to be the right response for these children? But importantly, how can we support our staff so that they are best able and most resilient to provide that support for young people? And I don't think we would have got there if we hadn't really started thinking about trauma-informed practice. And again, just to get into the detail a little bit, and again, I'm just trying to illustrate how this thinking can affect practice. We've looked at increasing well-being for our staff. So this was from numerous reasons, but that includes things like giving them gym membership. And this is kind of driven by the idea that the last thing these kids need is another stressed out caregiver, another burnt out person. We've looked at rota changes to increase work-life balance, again, so that staff member or that group is more able. But you could argue that we would have got there regardless of trauma-informed thinking, right? You could think that's just a nice thing to do anyway. But there's other things that asking ourselves that question have given us. One example is the provision of on-site reflective support for our staff. So this is fairly new. I don't think many places do it. But an external person who can say, right, what's the effect of this job on you as individuals, and how can we make you be more resilient for these young people? We've also introduced a psychological first aid policy, and there's no way we would have got that if we weren't thinking about trauma-informed care. And if you don't know, psychological first aid is a kind of growing evidence-based approach that looks at responding immediately after crisis events. So giving people what they need in that immediate aftermath of crisis events. And obviously we have quite a lot of crisis events given the young people we have, but this will hopefully reduce the longer term impact of that on staff, but also young people. And lastly, we've employed 2 people to be present in that life space to role model and to support trauma-informed practice. And there's no danger we wouldn't have done that if we hadn't been thinking about trauma-informed principles. So believe me, I could go on, right? I could go into a lot of detail. I've got Gantt charts as long as your arm about how this is all trying to change our organisation. But I just wanted to go into that detail to illustrate it can affect just about everything that you do if you ask yourself that question: how can we respond? So yeah, 10 minutes is a short time, but in conclusion, there's many services that we all probably work for that are doing important things for these people already, for people who've experienced difficulty. Yet I think asking ourselves this question and implementing trauma-informed lens can significantly improve what we do. But that is not just half a day's training. That is a lot longer. It takes investment and time and effort to do that in a meaningful way. And I think that if we do that, then Scotland's going to be really well placed to be part of an effective response for young people. Thanks very much.